Alright, so here we are taking a look at some aggregation reports from POSolver, and we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the aggregate output from the perspective of play on the flop. So we'll be taking a look at some common scenarios, we'll be looking at some of the results here in Excel, and then we'll also be switching back to POSolver from time to time. So we'll talk about common lines, and let me just go ahead and talk about what those common lines are, and let me just go over here to the browser. Common lines here, as we go to the flop, are going to be the root element, so the flop being dealt, and I'm focusing up here on this main area, and then a little bit down here in some other areas that I'll point out. The out of position player has the opportunity to go ahead and check, so we have the check option, we also have a bet 20 option. When we check, the in position player can bet 20 or bet 35. When they bet, the out of position decision becomes a call and then two raise values that appear here. Likewise, when they go ahead and bet 35, there's going to be the raise to 85, raise to 70 options that do appear here. And if we go back all the way out to the root element, the out of position player can go ahead and lead for 20 here, and that gets us into raise 40, raise 70 kind of decisions, so on and so forth. So we're just going to be focusing on this initial area, and I want to go ahead and just talk about real quick, just kind of remind you the ranges that we're dealing with. So the out of position player goes ahead and has a 21.87% of hands range, so a total of 290 combinations out of all possible combinations, and it's going to go ahead and be all your pocket pairs, your suited Broadway cards that can make a royal, your good aces, and then we get into a lower distribution or lower frequency of your weaker suited aces, your weaker Broadway or weaker straight hands, then your connectors, and then kind of a similar distribution over here for your offsuit aces, and so on and so forth. And then we have some suited connectors down here at a much lower frequency. So those are the ranges that we're dealing with. So let's go ahead and minimize this, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the Excel spreadsheets. On the left hand side, I have the out of position player, and then I have on the right hand side the in position player. So what we're focusing on here is we're focusing on where it says action line. So we go ahead, and that's going to be this item here, and it's going to just be the root, and this is going to go ahead, and so the root is where the flop has been dealt. And then over here on the right hand side, we have where the root exists, and then a check has occurred. So talking about this, there's another video that goes through and talks about the aggregation reports, the specific fields. I'll leave that to you if you want to go back and watch that. It's just a couple minutes long. You can go ahead and take a pause, maybe jump over to that if you feel that you need a refresher or would be helpful. The basic structure that we have here, though, these are all of the 25 flop analysis that we've gone ahead and done. When we're looking at POSolver and it gave us the bet or check option, it showed a frequency that existed in there. We saw a frequency in the strategy component. Well, that's what we see here in Excel. Now, the Excel has gone ahead and color coded it for us, so we can get a quick kind of bird's eye view of what the most common frequencies, or kind of where the frequencies distribute themselves across the series of flops that we're that we're looking at here. So that being said, if we go ahead and take a look at the out of position player on the board, and this is kind of the one that's kind of interesting that this is the first one that lists off, because it's kind of the one that's a little untypical. But when we have the 10 of spades, 8 of spades, 7 of diamonds, on this board with the range of hands that we're assigning, actually the equilibrium play is to go ahead and lead out for 20. And I should mention that these are all going to be $60 pots on the flop, to go ahead and lead out for a small bet at a high frequency, at a great frequency, so 76.69% of the time. Go ahead and be leading out here. Going into this analysis and doing setup and prior analysis, it's pretty much known or understood that the out of position player is really going to be checking quite often at a very high frequency percentage of the time. So to go ahead and do larger bets here for the out of position player takes quite a bit of CPU time in terms of processing to get all the files processed and analyzed, so on and so forth. But I really wonder for this exact line, if a larger bet size would be recommended, just because we stretch so heavily towards a bet component vice a check component. Now, in future videos, we will go ahead and open up this exact line. We will open this up in PIO, and we will look at the Range Explorer to go ahead and look at, these are the value bet components, these are your bluffs, these are your checks, so on and so forth. And we'll be looking at specific hands and what kind of makes this up. But as you can see, this is going to be a really wet board. It has a single high card value. There's going to be floating opportunities. There's drawing opportunities to flushes. There's made straights. There's drawing to straights, so on and so forth. So there's such a large component of the range that this does hit vice a tighter range. So I can definitely understand why it stretches heavily towards the bet component. Now, that being said, we also see here within the same thing, the 10 of clubs, 9 of diamonds, 4 of spades, so where we go ahead and kind of remove the flush opportunities on the flop. It would have to be really a backdoor, and then also the straight opportunities, would have to be backdoor as well too. You can see the frequency becomes more balanced, so 53, 46, kind of closer to 50-50. Then we go ahead and we have the 10 of clubs, 6 of diamonds, 5 of spades. It orients itself more to the check. And then we get into the high card value of queens. It's going to be a check at an extremely high frequency. Kings also going to be a high frequency, where we have again a board that's draw heavy. It's a little more balanced. When we get back here into high card value, it's going to go ahead and be more oriented towards a check. Likewise as well too, our aces are going to be more oriented towards a check, with some bets that are going to be in here. And then for our low cards, it's going to be balanced or more oriented to a check. But what we really want to look at here or focus on is the overall frequencies for the out of position player. Really is going to be checking 73.7% of the time, going to be betting a quarter of the time, but again, this average right here is heavily weighted towards boards that do have a very significant draw component, and then as well too, also when the exact holdings go ahead and smash kind of your top pair combos, you can go ahead and lead out here. It's also worth noting too, kind of looking at some of the other fields here, we look at in position EQR, so this is equity realization, and then we have the out of position equity realization. So 82% of the time the equity is going to be realized for out of position, but 94% of the time equity is going to be realized in position. So you can see the in position player goes ahead and realizes their equity at a much greater frequency. The expected value of the out of position player is 23.3, vice 30.1, so that's a 6-point-x difference. So basically there's a $6 greater expectation for the in position player, and then likewise as well too, the equity runs much higher, or I shouldn't say much, but the equity does run higher than the for the in position player, vice there. So overall, if we look at the key stats, we can definitely see that in the aggregate, the out of position player is kind of at a mathematical disadvantage from the standpoint of equity, expected value, and then equity realization, vice the in position player. So it will be checking a majority of the time. Now, going back to looking at line item details, there are situations in certain flops where those values are higher. So if we look at the extremely draw-heavy boards where we are leading out for a bet, or the out of position in the equilibrium solution is leading out for a bet, it does have a higher equity, it does have a higher EV, it does have a higher equity realization. So these are all important items. These are all important items to note. So that's really going to be the kind of the structure of the document and the structure of all of the analysis going forward for purposes of this video. So again, I think the main takeaways here are, the main key factors of equity, EV, and equity realization is at a mathematical disadvantage, vice the in position player. And we go ahead and again, for in the aggregate, we'll be checking 73.7% of the time, and then going ahead and betting a quarter of the time. But again, these are going to be this betting component is going to be directed towards boards that do have a heavy draw component. Likewise as well too, if we go over here and look at the right hand side, the specific line that we're looking at here is where the action is checked. So let me just try and highlight this cell here. Perfect. So the root and it has been checked. So in this case here, global percentage. So this is going to be the overall frequency that appears. You can see here that the percentage of the time that we are checking, 23.31, is a match to what's over here in this column for global percentage. So the frequency that the out of position player checks is going to be the frequency that the in position player encounters this situation. So you can basically see that this column over here in column J on the left is going to be basically the value, although column J is slightly rounded, will be the value over here for column B in the let me just bring this back over here. Okay. Column B in the imposition action that's taken care of. So if we go ahead and take a look in the aggregate here, it's pretty balanced. So let's just scroll down right here and take a look at what we're doing for our overall values. We're going to be checking 50% of the time, and we're going to be betting 50% of the time. So what we have here for our bet component is it's distributed towards betting of a $20 value into a $60 pot, and then also betting $35 into a $60 pot. So what we can see is there are spots where there's two green cells, so there's these are balanced together I think pretty well, but then also a very small percentage of time we'll go ahead and do the bet of 35, and then immediately down here you can see that we'll go ahead and be betting 35 more so than 20, and then also these two add up to be greater. Actually, they're balanced with the check. But overall, you can kind of see there's this balance component where 50% of the time you'll be checking, and then 50% of the time you'll go ahead and be betting. If we go ahead and take a look at the aggregate values here, we can see that once the out of position player checks, the equity, I'll just call it the equity gap, the delta or the difference between the equities of the in position player and the out of position player really go ahead and begin to separate themselves. So we can see that the equity of the out position player drops down to 44, equity of in position 55. The EVs drop off. So just basically by checking, you're transitioning. What is it? Looks like just a little under a 3-chip EV from the out of position player over to the in position player, and then likewise as well too. The out of position player will not be realizing their equity, or their equity realization is going to be drops off compared to the in position player. So equity realization goes down for out of position, and equity realization goes up for in position. So always a good thing for the in position player when that player checks. So again, it's just going to be very, very balanced. Now we will go ahead in a future video, and we will go ahead and open up each of these lines and take a look at the specific details that are there. But again, just for quick review of a common line, the out of position player will go ahead and check their weaker range, except on very specific boards where it does make more sense for them to go ahead and bet out. But that will be at 75%, about a 73%. I would call it 75. 75% they'll check, quarter of the time, 25% they'll bet, and then once the check comes, the in position player will go ahead and be checking 50% of the time, and then betting the corresponding 50% of the time, and then it's kind of a split between 35-15 and going ahead and betting. Betting there, which component you're going to do in here, and it's helpful to be aware when we break these open to see, okay, this board texture and how the in position player range connects with it merits the larger bet. You can kind of see your aces down here. We'll just kind of visually scan down here. Especially these aces right through here, these two. These aces draw towards being a larger bet at a little bit greater frequency. So there we have that. So again, kind of being repetitive at this point, the out of position player is going to be checking 3/4 of the time, betting 20 1/4 of the time with certain exceptions, and then the in position player will go ahead and be checking 50 and then also betting 50, and then the bet sizing that we have there kind of distributes itself between certain properties and certain boards here. So that's going to be a look at that line. Let's go ahead and I'll pause the recording and bring the next screens up. Alright, so with the magic of video editing, gone ahead and swapped out. Now we have two screens up here, and we're looking from the perspective of the out of position player again. And like I said, we will go ahead and make future videos that break these individual lines out into specific detail, but the common line that we're taking here is the most common line would be the out of position player to check. The in position player when the imposition player checks as well too, obviously we go to the turn, and the conversation here focuses on flop. So we're going to go ahead then and be looking at the next most common action, which would be the 20 bet. So they bet 20 into 60, and then the action comes back to the out of position player. Likewise, the in position player also had an option to bet 35, and we'll look at that as well too. But case in point, there has been the scenario that we're looking at here is there has been a flop, there has been a check, there has been a bet by the in position player, and now we're looking at the out of position player's global response across a series of flops. And again, future videos will go into detail. So that scenario being laid out, that's really what we're looking at here, where we say action line, we have the root, which is going to be the flop, we have check, then we have a bet of 20 by the in position, and now we're back to out of position. So if we look at our global stats here down on line 30, we can see that as a response to that, the out of position player is going to be folding 40.99 or 41% of their range. They're going to be calling with 37% of their range, and then basically 21.5% of the time they're going to go ahead and be raising some component as well too. Now it should be noted that there are specific flops and specific flop textures and specific flop properties that go ahead and dictate how these overall aggregate aggregate values are achieved. So within specific flops there are specific lines of play that are taken. So you can see that, again, I'll just focus over here on this exact line, the 10 of clubs, 6 of diamonds, 5 of spades. All options are pretty well balanced, as opposed to down here, things are more skewed towards a call fold type of scenario. Likewise down here, aces and your low cards go ahead and I think have a little bit greater balance, so on and so forth. And even the global response is certainly balanced, because you have 41 for a fold, you have 37.5 for a call, and then you go ahead and it looks like the delta there is mainly going to be your call. Your raise 40, and then you go ahead and you have your raise a certain percentage of the time. So that being said, it's also helpful, I think, to go ahead and look at what's going on here for the overall equities and EVs and so on and so forth. We can see here that the in position equity has a greater advantage vice out of position. The expected value is huge compared to the out of position player. And then the equity realization is massive compared to the out of position player, and I think the maxims that we hear or read in poker books, playing weaker ranges out of position are just simply more difficult, especially if you don't hit an exact, especially you don't hit the value component of the range that you're playing. It's extremely tough, and you can kind of see how the overall math begins to go ahead and shape itself out. And again, I'll continue to put the gold star on certain subject matters, because there are certain spots where the math is a little bit more even. On the flop, a couple spots where it's even at an advantage vice vice the in position player and stronger ranges, given the texture. So just helpful things to note, but hopefully this aids, really the goal here is just to kind of aid and develop into a global understanding of what's going on the flop. So when we go ahead and take the perspective from when bet of 35 is done, the only real difference is mainly going to be it's going to be a larger bet sizing. So if we look down here, we'll just kind of focus on this bottom line for the global properties that occur. I'll just go ahead and take a look at this. We're going to go ahead and be folding 42% of the time, so pretty close to what our bet 20 is going to be. If we go ahead and look at our call, we're definitely be calling more often. So I'm kind of going to be speculating here. When we go ahead and look at this in detail, we can kind of see that our the raise sizing that we have here, because it is a larger bet, because the sizings are getting larger, the frequency just goes down quite a bit more. So we can see that we're going to go ahead and be calling and folding to a greater frequency, and then very likely, what we were going ahead and over here on when we face the 20 bet, the raise 70, raise 40, I'm sure quite a few of those hands or those combinations are going to redistribute themselves over here into the call fold range. Likewise as well too, with the larger sizing, we can kind of compare out of position equity is still at a disadvantage here, but then as well too, EV still at a disadvantage, vice in position, and then equity realization is at a much lower frequency, vice the in position equity realization. So those are going to be the most common items. Let me go ahead and switch up the screens, and we'll look at one more kind of facet about this real quick. Hold on just one second. Alright, so I've gone ahead and switched up the screens, and the very last item I want to look at here is the check raise. And basically now this is where the action goes back to the in position player, and we look at the line. It's going to be root, which is our flop. We go ahead and we start off with a check. The in position is going to go ahead and bet 20, and then out of position is going to go ahead and raise 40 as the most common line. Now, that being said, this overall is a pretty infrequent line. Overall this is going to happen about 4.5% of the time. And let's go ahead and look at our overall frequencies. So when we counter this spot, we're going to be folding 25% of the time, calling 45% of the time, and then we're going to have a re-raising option a combined 30% of the time. So it's going to be pretty balanced. One of the spots in the analysis here, if we ever do like a version 5 of this analysis, we probably kind of fix this exact line. In the case of raise 40, they're going to have to go ahead and raise to the an 80 bet, which is probably closer to 90. So in the case of the actual analysis, there would be some sort of split where I'm sure in terms of raise 60, there's probably a few hands that would go ahead and orient themselves towards a call. If we look at whatever this, I think this one's a little bit easier. We have 55 basically 56% of the time with the in position range on the queen 7 with a spade draw. You're going to go and be raising. Obviously I think that this is basically, the raise of 60 is basically going to be the same as 90. So there might be a little bit of a fix or adjustment to here, but we can make, I think, some very reasonable approximations that the hands are going to be in the 13.9 should go ahead and redistribute themselves back and add to the 15.27, because if you're going to be raising to 60, given the actual structure of a live cash game, you're going to need to go to 80 for the min raise or even bigger. So the value components here, and some bluffs as well too, would go ahead and redistribute themselves over here. So we can kind of look at this, I think, basically kind of the same, or kind of group them together. But you're going to be folding a quarter of your range. You're going to go ahead and 45% you're going to be calling with, and then you're going to go ahead and with 30% or close approximation to it, you're going to go ahead and be re-raising with that as well too. And again, I think in the future we'll spend a little bit of time on this exact line, because it will be helpful. You can kind of see, even though this is 13%, it's heavily weighted towards some very strong values here. So either you're going to be let's just take a look here, just kind of scanning over as I'm reading this live, just kind of scanning this over here. Yeah, so for example, this one we looked at here for the queen 7 with the spade draw. I mean, you're either going to have the spade draw or queen. You have some sort of nut type hand to go ahead and re-raise. Likewise as well too on the Broadway all monotone board, and then I'm sure there are certain properties about these ace high boards as well too that orient themselves to a much stronger here. And then likewise as well too, you have some high card drawing boards that a quarter of the time approximately are going to go ahead and be re-raising as well too. But again, mostly calls here. So it is helpful to go ahead and take a look and understand what the common frequencies are as well too. It is also very interesting to see, just by virtue of doing the check raise, as we go through and listening to the recordings and looking at the numbers, we can immediately see, once the check raise occurs, the math of equity, EV, and equity realization immediately kind of switches around in favor of the out of position player. So we can see that there's an equity advantage in this exact spot. There's an EV advantage. There's also going to go ahead and be a greater equity realization when the check raise does occur. So we can kind of see just basically how strong of a play it truly is, or can be at least. So those are going to be some common frequencies that we look at. I think there's definitely going to be more of a devil in the details when we go ahead and break open the individual line items and look at play. I think once we go ahead and finish those videos, I think you'll have an especially strong perspective, or a good perspective, of some common flop play for a strong in position range, vice a weaker out of position range, which really should be the more common type or style of play that you go ahead and see. You simply just want to go ahead and, again, a couple facets of profitability. I think at almost any poker game is going to be leveraging a strong range, leveraging in position, leveraging initiative, and then making hands. There's also some other facets as well too, but again, I think you can kind of start to see where the math orients and directs itself. So that's going to be it for this recording of this short series. We'll start with another one where we go back to the earlier flop plays, and we're going to go ahead and be looking at each individual line that we see here, and quickly filling out these note columns. Just kind of a quick preview on that. Let me go ahead and just bring up Pio again. Let me just go to the browser here. Let me go ahead over here, and we'll just go ahead and put the check in here. We'll look at bet. If we look at the Range Explorer, great, we'll be able to take a look at what components are being bet at what frequency, checks, so on and so forth. We'll take a look at what is a mixed strategy and pure strategy. We'll be able to take a look at slicing off kind of what value hands typically are, take a look at those components, where bluffing frequencies start to look at, and I think a whole series of details once we get into the Range Explorer for each individual line. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. Hopefully it'll be interesting, invaluable, and improve your game. If there's any questions, thoughts, ideas, let me know. Take care.